Welcome to the last episode of Cool British Singles from 1966. December 1966 was a truly excellent month for singles, so I can't think of a better way to end these series. Let's begin.
I thought you were supposed to be in Paris.
I am in Paris.
December 1966 saw the release of Cream's second 45. The group's debut single, Wrapping Paper, was seen as a disappointment by both fans and critics. But the group's second release was the sort of material that everyone expected from Cream. The single got excellent reviews in the press. Disc magazine journalist Penny Valentine wrote,
"Having hated beyond words Wrapping Paper, I'm delighted to be able to say that this is a great record. Written by the group, this is a striking experiment in ideas subtly worked on, to prove conclusively that the Cream will be 1967's most interesting group."
The B-side was another great song called NSU.
I don't wanna go until I found it all out.
The single reached number 11 in Britain, and spent 12 weeks on the charts. In the States, the single stalled at number 116.
Hey, Joe, where you going with that gun of yours?
Jimi Hendrix moved to the UK in September 1966, and this was the first single he recorded in Britain. The British press started writing about Hendrix even before the single was released. His shows at several clubs in London caught audiences by surprise, and his guitar playing and stage antics were seen as revolutionary. Disc magazine reported,
"Now Hendrix has literally exploded upon the pop scene in London. Hippie club dwellers and star artists alike are singing his praises. In pop circles, his name is rapidly becoming a household word. But seeing is believing, and until you actually watch Jimmy, you won't really appreciate the experience."
Penny Valentine reviewed the single for Disc magazine.
The song that was done quickly by that nice group Love, and done in fact so many times, is here given a superb treatment by new man Hendrix. A great dirty slow sound with nice backing voice and some excellent guitar playing. I like this song anyway, and I can see this version attracting a great deal of deserved attention.
The B-side of the single was Stone Free.
Don't breathe, to ride the breeze. Don't breathe, I can't stay. Got to get away.
Hey Joe entered the top 10 of the UK singles chart in January 1967, and peaked at number 6. The single was released in the United States on May 1, 1967, with the song 51st Anniversary as the B-side, but it failed to chart there.
Happy Jack wasn't told, but he wasn't told. He lived in the sand at the island.
December 1966 also saw the release of Happy Jack by The Who. The song got mostly excellent reviews in the press. Penny Valentine wrote,
The Who have established themselves firmly as purveyors of these dear sort of songs, and they do them very, very well. Pete Townsend is definitely one of Britain's finest writers, with so much charm in his work, that he's a sort of modern-day Hans Christian Andersen. I love this record, which will undoubtedly be a gigantic hit.
The B-side was a song called I've Been Away.
Never, ever, ever gonna go away again.
The single reached number 3 in Britain, and it was also a top 10 hit in several European countries. Happy Jack also became the group's first top 40 hit in the United States, where it was released in March 1967 and peaked at number 24. And the single achieved its highest chart position in Canada, where it reached number 1 and stayed in the charts for several weeks. This single by a band called Alan Pound's Get Rich is one of those 1966 singles which sounded way ahead of its time. In fact, it wouldn't be strange to mistake this single for a punk or even post-punk single from the late 70s or early 80s. The song had a truly strange way out sound. It sounded crude and distorted, but it also had a very melodic psychedelic feel. Unfortunately, the single was barely promoted and it only managed to get this small review from Record Mirror. The song wasn't rediscovered until several years later, when it was featured on several compilations of rare British singles from the 60s. And another single from December 1966 which sounded ahead of its time, was this one by The Misunderstood. The group took the psychedelic and Indian-influenced experimentation of the Yardbirds to new heights, and they sounded unlike anything else from that period. This was mostly due to the fact that instead of having a lead guitarist, The Misunderstood had a steel guitarist. Steel guitarist Glenn Ross Campbell approached his instrument very much in the same way that Jeff Beck approached guitar. Campbell added fuzz and distortion to the steel guitar, and he experimented with effects such as feedback. The band was originally formed in Riverside, California. Legendary British DJ John Peel, who at the time was working in California, saw the group live at the Pandora's Box in Los Angeles. And Peel was so blown away by their music, that he immediately became their manager and convinced him to move to Britain, where he felt their music would be better received. Upon arrival, however, the band's original rhythm guitarist was drafted, and he had to be replaced by British musician Tony Hill. The group finally released their first single in December 1966. Record Mirror wrote,
Very way out material, freak out in style with weirdly efficient singing and wailing instrumental sounds. This one is a favorite outsider for the charts.
The B-side was a truly unique sounding cover of this classic by Bo Diddley.
I walked 47 miles of barbed wire, got a cobra snake for a necktie.
Both fans and critics were quite impressed after seeing the group performing live at the Marquee in London. And the British press was already predicting that The Misunderstood would become one of the big names of 1967. But unfortunately, lead singer Rick Brown was drafted by the US Army to go to Vietnam. However, being opposed to the war, Brown escaped and left the country for India, where he was a fugitive for 12 years. In an interview several years later, Brown said, I was hiding in India living as a Hindu monk from 1968 to 1979. In 1979, I snuck back into the USA from Mexico, and I eventually got freed from the army and legal problems later that year. The rest of the group traveled to France to play a few gigs. And when they decided to return to England, immigration refused them entry due to problems with their work permits. Finally, they were allowed into the UK on the condition that they leave within 24 hours. The band had to sell their instruments and fly back to California, and that was the end of the group. In an interview several years later, John Peel said,
If I had to list the 10 greatest performances I've seen in my life, one would be The Misunderstood at Pandora's Box in 1966. It was the only time I've seen an audience reduced to impotent silence. I Can Take You to the Sun is one of the great records of all time. It's a record which still has the capacity to astonish me. They were a great band, and if they hadn't been broken up by the US government when they tried to draft Rick Brown, I think they would have ruled the world.
Silent night has turned to a night of fear. The windows howling wind into your ears.
December 1966 saw the release of The Move's first single. Prior to the release of the single, the British press had already been writing about the group due to their shocking live shows at the Marquee, where the band smashed television sets and even cars. Due to the destructive and noisy nature of their shows, critics expected something wilder from the band, and as a result, the single got mixed reviews in the press. The Melody Maker wrote,
A touch of the 1812 overture, and then the Move are off on a vast choral tale of how Silent Night has turned to a night of fear. It doesn't sound all that way out for an avant-garde pop group. In fact, it sounds a bit dated, but it will be one of those records you hear every 10 minutes between dog food ads on Radio Chat, the station of the bores.
The highlight of the single was the B-side, a song called Disturbance.
Ever since there's been a slight disturbance in my mind, kind of disarrangement that surges cannot find.
The song was more psychedelic and more akin to the sort of material that the band performed on stage. The last part of the song almost sounds like it could have been an influence on the song Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath. Considering that both The Move and Black Sabbath were from Birmingham, it isn't that far-fetched to think that Sabbath might have taken a few ideas from The Move. And The Move's drummer Bev Bevans was even drummer for Black Sabbath during the Born Again tour, and he later played percussion on the Eternal Idol album in 1987. Despite the mixed reviews, the single was a huge success, reaching number 2 and remaining in the charts for 10 weeks.
I'm not your stepping stone.
Another highlight from December 1966 was this great slowed-down cover of I'm Not Your Stepping Stone by The Flies. Their cover of the song, with its great fuzz guitar and excellent vocals, had an aggressive and menacing tone that made it sound very different from the more popular version by Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Well, you're trying to make your mark on society by using all the tricks that you used on me.
The single got a lot of airplay on pirate radio stations, and The Flies even managed to reach number 11 on the Radio London charts, but the single failed to make a dent on the national charts. Later in 1967, the group appeared on the legendary 14-hour Technicolor Dream, a psychedelic festival where the group arranged hundreds of bags of flour to explode and consequently cover the unsuspecting audience. Their version of the song didn't chart, but the song became a cult favorite due to its appearance on several compilations over the years. Just a month after the release of this single, the Monkees also recorded a cover of the song and released it as the B-side of I'm a Believer.
Bright lights, Soho, Wardour Street. You hope you make friends with the guys that you meet.
David Bowie released 4 singles in 1966, but none of them managed to chart. London Boys was originally released as the B-side of Rubber Band, and it's widely considered to be one of the best songs from that early period in Bowie's career. The lyrics concern a 17-year-old kid who leaves home for London.
You're only 17, but you think you've grown in the month you've been away from your parents' home.
The protagonist becomes embroiled in the mod scene, and he turns to pills in order to fit in.
You take the pills too much. You don't give a damn about the job you've got.
As the song builds, the kid manages to become part of the mod subculture, but his dissolute triumph leaves him more alone than ever before.
Now you wish you'd never left your home. You've got what you wanted, but you're on your own with the London Boys.
In 2015, Mojo magazine listed the song as Bowie's 91st best track. And London Boys has been covered by several artists such as The Times and Mark Armand. As seen in previous videos, 1966 saw many bands covering tracks from the Beatles' Revolver. But of course, no one dared to cover Tomorrow Never Knows.
Wait, what are you talking about?
Love is all and love is everyone. It is now
The Mirage were the only band from 1966 who had the courage to record a cover of Tomorrow Never Knows. Their version of the song was obviously not a patch on the original, but the group deserves props just for having the guts to cover it. And considering that the band didn't have the studio budget that the Beatles had, this is actually a pretty decent cover of the song. Instead of relying on studio effects and tape loops, the Mirage approached the song from a more harmony-based psychedelic pop direction, and the trippy piano was a nice touch. The single, perhaps not surprisingly, failed to reach the charts. Prior to changing their name to Slade and becoming one of the most popular glam groups of the 70s, Noddy Holder and Company were known as the In-Betweens, and this was their first and only single. The single was produced by American producer Kim Fowley, who moved to Britain in 1966 and lived in London for a brief period of time. The A-side was a good cover of You Better Run by the Young Rascals.
What you trying to do to my heart? What you trying to do to my heart?
The The song already displayed the group's knack for high-energy material. The B-side, a song called Evil Witch Man, was a rewrite of I Take What I Want by Sam and Dave.
I'm just what you need. I'm an evil witch man, babe. Yes, I am.
Despite enjoying local popularity, the single was virtually ignored nationally, and it inevitably failed to chart. Kim Fowley also produced this single by a group called the Freaks of Nature.
Let's freak out. Let's freak out.
The Freaks of Nature were actually the Belfast Gypsies, who changed their name for this single release. Both sides of the single sounded very much like the sort of material that many American garage bands were releasing during that period. The B-side of the single was a track called The Shadow Chasers, which sounded very much like American groups such as The Seeds.
It's my sister in the attic, my mother on the roof. Running out of scratching, they can't catch me.
Record Mirror wrote,
Kim Fowley's production people Let's Freak Out by the Freaks of Nature is a widely conceived erratic and yet listenable item.
just like the in-between single, this 45 by the Freaks of Nature didn't manage to chart. Later in the 70s, Kim Fowley became the manager of the Runaways.
My mind is acting just as it should be. Don't wanna work machine.
Another artist who enjoyed more popularity later in the 70s was Groundhog's leader Tony McPhee. McPhee formed this band called Herbal Mixture in 1966, and this was their second and final single. Record Mirror wrote,
Good bluesy sounds on this jerky, somewhat unbalanced slice of earthiness. It may get lost, but plugging could help it through.
The B-side was another good song called Please Leave My Mind.
I see your face in my mind. Seems you're looking straight through me.
Just like the band's previous single, the record was a commercial failure. By late 1966, the Pretty Things seemed lost and lacking musical direction. The band's anarchic rhythm and blues was deemed outdated, and all the singles they released in 1966 went pretty much unnoticed. The Pretties attempted to adapt to the new times with this song called Progress, which saw the band moving towards a more soul-based direction. The single got mixed reviews in the press. The Melody Maker wrote,
Ever since Viv Prince left, the Pretties seem to have lost some of their impetus, and their new clean short hair image doesn't seem to have had much effect. But this is a competent, catchy performance and a good production while not particularly original. Let's hope the Pretties make some progress, and all the shouting at the end could be the main sales point.
The B-side was a song that had already been featured on the group's second album.
You move around, then start to jerk.
The single failed to chart.
The next Robbie Dale Sure Shot. 7 minutes before 1's the time on your number one station, Caroline South, as we sit back and relax listening to the Flies singing.
I hope you enjoyed this trip back to December 1966. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.